This is a 2014 Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution X, and it is a really impressive Japanese sports sedan. And I mean really impressive. The Evo, as it's called, came out almost 30 years ago as a high-performance, rally-inspired Mitsubishi rival to the Subaru Impreza WRX STI. And it gained a loyal group of devoted followers until it was canceled after the 2015 model year. Today, I'm going to review this Evo. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. If you're looking to sell a cool car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place for cool cars from the modern era. And if you're looking to buy a cool car from the modern era, we have amazing daily auctions running at all times. Right now there's this, and this, and this, and this, all being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. So check it out, carsandbids.com. So let's talk Lancer Evolution, or Evo as pretty much everyone calls it. The Evo first came out in the early 1990s. It was the high-performance version of the kind of crappy, basic, cheap Mitsubishi Lancer economy car, which was sold here in North America as the Mitsubishi Mirage. Initially, it was called the Evolution because it was the high-performance evolution of the Lancer. And then as they tweaked it over the years, it became the Evolution 2, the Evolution 3, whatever. Mitsubishi finally brought the Evo to the United States for the 2003 model year, and by then it was the Evo 8 with 270 horsepower, but even that kept evolving. For the 2008 model year, Mitsubishi came out with this, the Evo X, which turned out to be the final evolution. It's powered by a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder with 290 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque, linked to all-wheel drive. Now you could choose between a manual or a dual-clutch automatic transmission in the Evo X, but to me the manual really better suited this car's character. This Evo is a 2014 model, so the second to last year of production, and it's a GSR model, which was the base version with the manual transmission. The Evo MR was more expensive, and it got you the sports suspension and BBS wheels, but it also meant you were stuck with the dual clutch automatic transmission. This is the one you want with the manual, and this Evo is especially unusual because it is stock, unmodified. Every single Evo on the planet has been modified, except for this one. And today I'm going to take you on a tour of this clean, unmodified Lancer Evolution, one of the last Evos made before Mitsubishi canceled this car because it didn't really fit in with their product portfolio, making a shift toward crossovers and SUVs. First, I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and features of the Evo X, then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Evo X with getting inside, and that means starting with the key, which as you can see looks just like a regular Mitsubishi key. Nothing interesting, nothing special here for the Evo, it's just the same key you'd get in other Mitsubishi models. And in fact, that's a bit of a theme with this car, the same thing you'd get with other Mitsubishi models. For instance, exterior badging. You see this Lancer Evo badge on the trunk clearly telling you what you're driving? Yeah, that's the only Lancer Evolution badge anywhere on the exterior of the car. It doesn't say Evo Evolution anything anywhere else. Not on the fenders, not on the hood, the sides, anywhere. You just have Mitsubishi badges just like normal. They didn't even bother to put an Evo badge in the usual places you'd expect, like for example the door sills. They're just blank. Doesn't say anything to reveal your Evo status. And it's even crazier when you get inside. You can see the floor mats say Lancer Evolution on them, and that's it. The only place this car has an Evo badge on the inside is the floor mats, which of course you're not even going to see because you're stepping on them. That's all. There are only 2 Evo badges on this entire car. A little one on the trunk lid and the front floor mats, and that's it. They really didn't shove in your face the fact that this is the Evo, the special performance model, like so many other performance models do. This car clearly comes from a different era of thought with that kind of thing, where you don't spend money on badging and showing off, you just put it all under the hood. And then you look around the rest of the interior and you can see that philosophy carried through to everything, because in this interior, it really doesn't look like a special performance car at all. Everything looks like what you'd expect from the standard Lancer compact car. For instance, in the center, you have 3 switches, 2 of them are blank, even though this is the Evo, the highest version of this car. The climate controls are exactly out of a Lancer. The buttons above those are exactly out of a Lancer. The steering wheel, I'm not sure if this is the Lancer steering wheel, but it's not Alcantara wrapped or thickly bolstered or anything like that. It just looks like a fairly standard Mitsubishi steering wheel. It's not really all that special. And that truth is carried all throughout this interior. Look at the door panel. Just cheap plastic, exactly like you'd expect from the $18,000 base model Lancer economy car. Here it is on the Evo, the special one for enthusiasts, but you still get the cheap plastic. They just didn't bother to upgrade it. Maybe my favorite is the center screen, the infotainment system. This is a Rockford Fosgate system, but it's not actually an infotainment system, it's just the radio, and it really looks like an aftermarket modification to this car, but it is in fact the factory radio, even though it looks like the kind of thing a tuner kid might install. Again, it just looks cheap and not all that nice, not fitting what you'd expect from the Lancer Evolution. And you can keep digging into this further. You go into the glove box, you pull out the owner's manual pouch, and you can see that the warranty book is shared between the Evolution and the Lancer Rally Art, which is just an improved version of the base car, nowhere near as high performance as the Evo, but they shared those things because ultimately at its core, this car is a Lancer, and it certainly reminds you of that. To me though, probably the craziest carryover from an economy car is the transmission. This car has a manual transmission like you'd expect from an enthusiast vehicle, but it's a 5-speed manual like you'd expect from an economy car in the early 2000s. This had to have been the last performance car to not have a 6-speed manual, but indeed it doesn't. You only get 5 gears in the Evo through the 2015 model year. Pretty insane. With that said, there is some performance stuff in this car. Like, for example, the only non-blink switch in the center says AWC, which stands for all-wheel control. As described by Mitsubishi, the all-wheel control is a 4-wheel dynamic control philosophy for maximally exploiting the capability of all 4 tires of a vehicle in a balanced manner to realize predictable handling and high marginal performance. More ridiculous, over-wordy PR speak I have never heard in my life. Basically, what it means is you can press this button and switch between tarmac, gravel, and snow. You can see the center screen actually change to those different driving types, and it will adjust the all-wheel drive system to optimize your driving for those different types of road. And another performance-y feature, over to the left of the steering wheel, you have a button there that will turn off the traction control. Press it and it goes off. A lot of cars have that, but in this case, it goes further. If you hold it down, it will turn off the AYC system. You can see this warning in the dashboard. That's the active yaw control, which kind of keeps you in place when it's going around a turn, but you can defeat it if you feel like you know better than the computer, which is a nice performance car touch. Also in the vicinity of that traction control off button, you have a little dial that you can use to adjust the positioning of the headlights. You can actually lower the headlights if you want. So if you have like a heavy load in the back of the car and the front end kind of kicks up, you can lower the headlights and get them back down on the road, which is a nice feature to have, something a driving enthusiast would use. And next up, another performance feature in this car. In the center screen, you have this little graphic that shows the super all-wheel control system in use. That's That's Mitsubishi's ridiculous term for all-wheel drive. Now, the middle part of this graphic will show the current usage of the differential, basically where power is going to the wheels. And on the sides, this shows how the AYC active yaw control system is being used, basically your current cornering. Although, as Evo owners rightly point out, the kind of driving that would make that screen useful is also the kind of driving where you'd want to be looking out the windshield and not at the screen, so it's kind of a gimmick. But it is there in case you want to track your real-time performance on the occasional glance into the gauge cluster. And next up, another performance car touch in here is the seats. This car has sport seats, and Recaro sport seats at that, and they are pretty aggressive. They have little holes at the top for a racing harness. They're pretty well bolstered to keep you in place around corners. They look cool, they look sporty, and they do fit the character of this car. Although it is worth noting, with a Recaro logo on each seat, you therefore have just as many Recaro logos in this interior as you have Lancer Evolution logos. That is pretty surprising. And finally, the last enthusiasty item in here, back to the gauge cluster, where you have a 180 mile per hour speedometer and a tachometer whose red line ranges from 7 to 9,000 RPM. You don't get that in the regular Lancer. And next up, we move on to the back seat in the Evo, and as you can see, there's not really all that much space back here. I have the front seat placed where I would sit, and well, I don't really have room for my knees to go down and my feet to be on the ground. Just another reminder that even though this is a super crazy performance car, it is ultimately based on the compact Mitsubishi Lancer, and you can tell in some ways. Another way you can tell is just the general feel back here. There's really nothing special for the rear seat passengers. You don't have a climate control vent. You don't even have a little storage pocket on the back of the front seats. And of course, the rear seats are not Recaros like they are in front. You just have a fairly traditional, fairly flat rear bench in the back of the Evo. You can tell this car was clearly designed for the people up front. The people in back were kind of an afterthought. And next up, we move around to the back of the Evo, where we see a fantastic example of just how cheap Mitsubishi is, including with this car. That would be the trunk popper. Now, to get the trunk open, you press this little button inside this silver circle on the back of the trunk. You might be wondering, well, why isn't the trunk popper like hidden above the license plate like basically every other car? Why'd they put it there? The reason is that on the regular Lancer, this is a keyhole. You stick the key in, twist it, and the trunk opens up. Now, Mitsubishi knew they couldn't get away with having a keyhole operated trunk on the rather expensive Evo, but they didn't want to make a second trunk lid design with no hole here and stick the popper somewhere else, so they just converted the keyhole into a trunk popper. So you press that and the trunk pops open. Very cynical, very cost-saving, but in keeping with the theory of this car, more performance, who cares about everything else? Anyway, you open up the trunk with the little popper, and you can see there are some interesting items in here. For one thing, the trunk is very small. You can tell just not all that much space for stuff. And the reason is these black panels on the back of the trunk. In these panels, over on the right, you have the battery. This is where the battery is stored, taking up valuable trunk space. Over on the left, you have the washer fluid for the front window. The windshield washer fluid is also taking up trunk space back here, dramatically limiting the space you have. Now, in the regular Lancer, this stuff is under the hood in the front, like on most other cars, but they didn't do that in the Evo, either because it has a larger engine, they didn't have room, or they were going for weight distribution. But either way, these items are back here and they steal from your trunk. Also stealing from your trunk, over on the left, you have a giant subwoofer. You got this if you got your Evo with the SSL package, which stands for Sun, Sound, and Leather. Sun meant you got a sunroof, which this car has. Sound meant you got that aftermarket looking Rockford Fosgate stereo, which included the subwoofer. And leather, of course, meant leather upholstery. So that speaker is back here too. All that stuff combines to make your trunk experience not very large. But anyway, moving on from the trunk in the Evo, let's talk exterior. Now, even though that Lancer Evolution badge is the only badge on the outside of this car telling you what it is, there are a few ways you can tell apart the Evo from the standard Mitsubishi Lancer economy car. The obvious one is the rear wing. Some Evos from earlier model years had a rear wing optional. You could choose either way, but by 2014 it was standard. They all had them, and it is quite large and very distinctive to the Evo. Also in back, you have a large diffuser below the rear bumper, very different from what you get in a standard Lancer model. Again, very easy way to spot an Evo instead of a regular Lancer. And the exterior changes don't stop there. You also have different wheels from the standard Lancer. Again, these are very distinctive to the Evo, and you can see within those wheels you have special Brembo brakes to provide added stopping power, pretty much what you'd expect from a performance car. Again, with the Brembo logos on those Brembo brakes, you have more Brembo logos on the outside of this car than Lancer Evolution logos. It's just crazy to me they didn't make it more clear what this car was, considering its reputation in the car world. And beyond that stuff, there are a few more ways to tell apart the Evo from the regular Lancer on the outside. Up front, you have a larger, more aggressive front end, a larger grille. Everything just looks bolder and more muscular up here. You also have a different hood design with these vents in them, also unique to the Evo. So there are several ways on the outside of this car that you can tell it's an Evo, even though there's really not all that much badging. And finally, we move on to the most important part of the whole Evo, because as much as they didn't change from the Lancer in the interior, the exterior of this car feels kind of cheap. They made some major changes under here. This is where you have the 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that this car is so well known for, 290 horsepower, 300 pound-feet of torque. Those are serious numbers, and truthfully, the kind of people buying the Evo, that's what they're paying for. They don't care if the interior is cheap and the door panels came from a Lancer and blah, blah, blah. It has this engine and the all-wheel drive system, and that is all that really matters. If you want a nice interior and good technology and whatever, you get a BMW and you spend way more money. If you just want the performance, you get one of these and you get this engine. And so those are the quirks and features of the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 10. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Evo. The first thing that surprised me about the Evo, it's been a long time since I've been in one, and it just doesn't have all that many quirks and features. And the reason for that is, especially on the inside, this is ultimately just a Lancer. This is a cheap economy car in here. It feels like a Lancer, it looks like a Lancer, and cars like that really don't have a lot of quirks and features. And in order to create the Evo, they did everything under the skin. The engine, the all-wheel control, all-wheel drive system, the active yaw control, everything about this car was tuned down below. That's where they wanted to spend the money. And if you asked Evo owners, they would say, yeah, that's where we want the money spent. Again, if they had wanted something really nice and fast, they would get a BMW and spend more. This was a car for people who wanted something that was relatively cheap and fast, and they could tune it and make it even faster. And they didn't care about luxuries and niceties. That wasn't the target. So all that stuff didn't matter that much. So that's a kind of an overview of what the car does poorly, which is the interior quality, that sort of thing. Let's talk about what the car does well. That would be undoubtedly the driving experience. First off, the acceleration. This car is fantastic. It really is quick, it feels quick, and it is quick. It has a lot of power at any speed. Very impressive when you get going. For a car with a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder that came out 12 years ago, this thing is really fast. And even for just a general car, this thing is pretty fast. It's impressive how fast it gets going. And when you start going that fast, you also start forgetting about some of the crappy interior stuff. It doesn't really matter all that much. Again, people only buy this car for the performance. In terms of the steering and handling, that too is obviously impressive. It's surprising what you can get from a Lancer chassis if you really go for it. The car changes directions very, very quickly. The steering is pretty precise, although I will say there's a little bit more body roll than I was expecting, but again, this is one of those things that people who tune these, modify them, just get that right out of there. There's a lot you can do to kind of upgrade this car and get away from that. The power just really comes on. When the turbocharger kicks on, it's really impressive. It really has a lot of power, and it kind of goads you into going fast. It's pretty easy to do, and it is fun to get it going that fast. The car also feels robust, like you can really beat on it and nothing is going to happen. You really floor it, you get deep into the rev range, and it's not like it starts shaking or rattling or that there's any bad feedback. It almost says, give me more, which is good because the car's not all that fast, kind of the lower, 2000 RPM, but if you get into it, it can be really, really rewarding. Really though, the way this car drives just makes you want to push it and shoot gaps in traffic, and woohoo! It's a very capable car. It was tuned for real performance. And they evolved it over a lot of years. And the evolution thing really is true. They were evolving this car over time. In terms of could you drive this every day? Yeah, I don't see why not. The ride is a little bit rough, but it's really not that bad. I don't even think it's as bad as a lot of sports cars. It's fine. A little wheel and tire noise. It's also just not all that nice. And I think that was one of the real issues that Mitsubishi started to run into with this car at the end. When the Evo first came out in 03, Mitsubishi brand name was okay, but over the years, it just degraded and degraded to the point where by 14, everybody knew this was a great performance car, but it was still a Mitsubishi, and the dealers were bad, and the experience was not good, and the quality was not good. And as a result, the only people who were buying this car were really hardcore Evo enthusiasts at the end, as opposed to at the start when people who had maybe a BMW or something like that would try to take a dip in the Evo pool. By the end, it was like, you really had to be committed to want to put up with having a Mitsubishi. Overall though, I think this is a great, fun performance car. These cars also don't lose really all that much value, so you can buy one, own it for a while, get out of it, and have had a cool car, during the process. This is a neat vehicle. It drives well, it's fast, it feels good, and it's just cool. You just don't see that many Evos anymore or ever. It's a cool car, it's a fun car, and frankly, it's enjoyable to check it out. And I really would love to shoot a clean 8 or 9 if one exists in Southern California, but they've all been modified. People bought this, they didn't care about the interior, they cared about how can I get more power, and they did. And so that's the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 10, the Evo 10. I have wanted to review an Evo for a long time, and I'm still looking for an 8 or a 9, but finding one of those that's unmodified is pretty much impossible. But this 10 is unmodified, and it is excellent. It's cool to spend the day with an iconic Japanese sports sedan. And now it's time to give the Evo 10 a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, I've always thought this era of Evo looks pretty nice. Obviously, it's no gorgeous sports car, but it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Handling is fine, not as good as I was expecting, but reasonably sharp, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is also fine. It's fast and fun, but it's still a Mitsubishi sedan at the end of the day, and now I see why so many people modify these for even more fun. It gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and these are cool, but not head-turningly so, especially to most people who just think it's a Lancer. It gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 29 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. This car has some tech, but not much, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Comfort is average, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is mixed. The interior just isn't really all that nice, but these aren't especially unreliable. It's basically just average, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Finally, value, and these are good values. They're not that expensive, but they hold value intensely well, so you can own one for a while and not lose much of anything. It gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 26 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 55 out of 100, which places the Evo here against some relevant cars. The Evo does well, though it can't quite touch the modern stuff, the Civic Type R, the Golf R, etc. Ultimately, this is a fun, fast car, but I was surprised how much Lancer there is in the Evo until you get it out on the road, which is a deterrent against newer rivals with more tech and better interiors.